Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Criterion Learning Series. Today, we are going to be covering incomes from the setup perspective, as well as assigning it to employees and positions and things of that nature. I do want to mention one thing that we, as a support organization and implementation, we are not going to discuss or recommend things around how incomes might be taxed in the country where you are located. So if you do have questions about how do you tax an income, how should it be shown on a tax form and those types of things, you're going to first need to speak with a tax advisor, a consultant, that type of thing. And then you can tell us what they've asked you to do. If they tell you to tax it a certain way or it needs to show up on a tax form, we can help to implement that, but we're not going to provide any advice regarding the taxability of incomes. So let's go ahead and get started in the system here, and I will go here to self-service. Now, I do want to point out in self-service, as far as what the employees can see, we have the incomes screen right here where they will see what has been assigned to them. And so they can see this screen. And of course, they can see older incomes if there were any that are expired for whatever reason. If you do see ones that have a zero amount that are hourly, in particular, let's say like regular time, double time, et cetera, you see some that are zero, that's going to use the pay rate from the employee's position. So if he's $20 an hour, as an example, you don't need to worry about this showing 20 as his rate for regular time. It'll pick that up from his position, or if it's multiple positions, from the position that's being on the timesheet and into payroll and things like that. The same type of thing with overtime and double time. We will calculate the rate during payroll. You don't need to worry about putting it here. Salary is another example. So what you do need to have is the amount when it's not something that is part of their, what I would consider to be their regular type of salary or pay. It's going to be something extra, in this situation, whatever display assembly is, he's going to get $55 when it is processed. So this is more of an override than the actual rate. So you don't have to go through and, for example, update this rate when somebody gets a pay change. All right, that being said, let's go over to the settings here. And of course, we'll go over to our payroll settings. And you're going to see incomes right here. Now, one other thing I do want to mention, and this goes back to that statement I made, is if there is something around the taxability of an income, we do have compensation types right here. These are going to be used for a variety of different types of incomes that might be on a person's pay. So if you come in here, you'll see there's going to be a whole bunch of these are already configured, and you'll see these when we get into the setup of this. But sometimes there's something where you need to tax it in a certain way. It doesn't fit into one of these particular preset compensations. And you'll notice these are one of those codes that I cannot change the existing ones that come with the system. You'll notice here, I cannot change the code, the name, or anything like that. If you ever do need to add one, for an example, I have this down here called taxable no withholding. This is one that I've added. I did the code of 1101 here. And then I'm saying, for an example, taxable no withholding, I added Alabama withholding. I said the type of this was it's cash, which means the employee is going to get the money. It's going to be added to their paycheck as pay it out, and it is subject to tax, or it is subject to tax, but we're not actually going to withhold any tax. So that's what that means: cash, subject, taxable. And you'll see the other options here: cash, non-subject, non-taxable. Think of that like a reimbursement. The employee doesn't need to report it as taxable income. You're not going to withhold any tax from it. This one, it's going to be reported as taxable income, but you're not going to be withholding. This one it's going to be reported and you're going to tax it. And then down here, non-cash. Non-cash means the person is not actually going to receive the money. You're processing it through payroll for some reason, maybe for the general ledger, maybe it's a taxed income or something like that. So that's what these are for. That's what non-cash is for. And the same terminology, not subject to tax and not taxable. You may be passing it through for general ledger purposes. So that's what that might be through here. Non-cash, you're going to report the wages, but you're not going to withhold anything. And then non-cash, you're going to report the wages and you're going to withhold taxes. Now, this one is one of those situations where they need to have some other type of income. Otherwise, how are you going to withhold anything? If the only thing is the particular income that is non-cash, subject taxable, no taxes will actually be withheld because there's nothing to withhold. Non-cash doesn't give them anything as far as any money to withhold from. All right, so that's what compensation type are. So sometimes in implementation or in support, we'll need to set these up for various taxes and things like that. So just to be familiar with these things, you won't see anything set up in these other ones. For an example, if I just go to cash, you don't see every single tax code here for everything. So you can see, different names here and stuff. You don't see like every single tax code and how it is handled. That is handled by the tax engine. So you don't need to worry about that and say, well, I don't see federal here or whatever it is. That's okay. So that being said, let's go ahead and look at incomes. We'll back up to payroll admin and incomes. Now, I already have a whole bunch configured. So you get an idea of what these look like. And I'm going to go into a few of these. I'm not going to set any up from scratch because I can change the settings on any existing one. So let me show you just a basic hourly income. Think of it as like just the regular pay that somebody's going to get paid if they are an hourly employee. I've called that regular time in my system. Of course, you can call it anything you like. Maybe you call this regular pay or just regular or hourly pay. That's okay. That terminology you're using is what the employee is going to see on their pay stub. Now, key thing is, of course, these are set up per employer. So if you have multiple employers, you will need to set these up for each employer. So here you can see the code. And again, this is something you can come up with whatever you like. Maybe you want to actually use the same description and code. That's okay. You can use numbers in here. You can use letters, of course. As you can see, upper, lowercase, you can do a mixture. So if I wanted to do regular 001 or something like that, that's okay. All right. Here you'll notice that compensation type. And if you remember some of the terminology I just showed, I got things like cash and bonus and third party and so forth. So this is where if you are setting up a new code that maybe has not been set up before and you refer to your tax advisor and they say, okay, you need to set this up as an educational assistant or whatever it is, you'll be able to select that as a compensation type. All right. So that's what that comes down to. I think you'll find that many things are just set up as cash, but these handle different situations as far as taxability, as well as where something might show up on a tax form. So perhaps it needs to be reported in a special box on your tax form. That's what these are going to be for. All right, I'm not going to go through every one of them because there's obviously a whole bunch. All right, so the pay type. So a regular pay means that it's going to be taxed using the regular tax tables. So as you may be aware, there are some taxes where it's a fixed percentage. It doesn't matter if they earn $1 or if it's $1 million, they're going to get the same tax percentage regardless. And of course, there are others that are progressive taxes. So this is going to use the tax table and those regular tax rates that apply there. So let's say we're talking US federal income, it's going to annualize the pay and it's going to figure out, okay, here's what it is and tax it at the rate that's appropriate. So that's what that pay type is for. Reimbursement, that is an expense reimbursement. So the person is getting repaid for, they bought a tank of gas for the company truck or something. So a reimbursement there, you're not going to tax them in that situation probably. So that's what that is for. And then supplemental, there are many tax codes, especially in the US, but also in other places where there's a supplemental rate. It's a separate tax rate for a particular type of payout. As an example, a bonus might have a supplemental rate, and for a state or a federal withholding, let's say it's 25%. It doesn't matter if it's a $10 bonus or $10,000 bonus, it's going to always be 25%. So that's what supplemental would be used for there. All right, the calculation method. Now, there are a whole bunch of these, as you can see, 8 different ones, and this does matter on how this is actually going to be calculated. So an amount would be you're giving him a flat amount. It's going to be, like I said, maybe $10 or $10,000 as a flat amount. All right, so you would put this in. Now, when I do an amount, I put a default rate in here, but then I can override it on the employee. So if this was that, that's what that would be for there. A formula. So you'll see as I'm changing these things, it's changing the boxes over here. So there might be a formula you need to calculate something. So that's what that would be for. And to reference the formulas, this is one, again, where you probably would want to reach out to support or implementation. But there is great help on this that explains how many different types of formula work. And if I scroll down, you'll see here different formulas that are out here. For an example, sum of a system label. Maybe you take 10% of some type of system, some type of incomes or something. That would be an example of that. And you can click here to get some other examples of those. This is obviously one where, everybody's got different types of formulas if that applies. So there's not a standard for how that works there. But usually there's some type of formula like this one right here that says sum system label. All right. Formula plus hourly. So what this will do is you can have a formula not only for the rate that they're going to get paid, but also the hours. So maybe you have 10% of their wages times a certain percentage of their hours, or only certain types of hours, or something like that. So that's where you can actually do it to both sides if you had to do that. Now, sometimes you just take a rate times the hours. So you don't need to put anything in the hours as an example. So that might be an example where you leave the hours blank, but you have a rate up here. This might be a sum of a certain type of hours or something. So again, this is one where you probably would need to work with support or implementation if you have a situation comes up where you have a new income on that. FTE, it's kind of like hourly, but it's going to look at the full-time equivalents of the employee. So rather than saying maybe 40 hours in a week being the full-time equivalent of somebody, you would put a 1, because that is the equivalent of being full-time. So instead of like 40 times a rate, it would be 1 times whatever that rate is for one full-time equivalent, or half an equivalent, or whatever. All right, hourly. I think this one's pretty straightforward. We're using the hours usually from the timesheets, but of course it could be just directly entered into payroll or imported in. But the time, some hours times a rate. Now you'll see here I have 2 fields. One is a rate and one is a multiplier. So the rate, if I leave this blank, it's going to go either reference what's on the particular income on the employee, or like I mentioned, maybe even their position. So, somebody might be $20 an hour. You don't need to add that here, or on the income when you assign it to the employee, it just is going to read from their position at $20 an hour. And then for something like an overtime where you say time and a half or double time, so you got a 1.5 or a 2, that's where you would do this. You don't need to say the rate is, rate times 1.5. The multiplier handles that. That's what this field is for. If it's blank, it assumes a 0, or excuse me, it assumes a 1. So like for hourly, I can leave this blank and it's going to do a 1. If I need it to be 0, for whatever reason, maybe you need to record the hours, but not actually pay it, you could have a 0 here. You could have a 0.5. So you could do, something like that, or, 2 times or 3 or whatever. Minimum wage. So what that'll do is, we did talk about minimum wage in a previous training. I don't remember exactly when, but it was in the last few months where we talked about minimum wage. So that's going to use the minimum wage table to determine how much somebody should get paid. So it'll look at their hourly rate, it'll look at the minimum wage table and determine, are they getting paid minimum wage or not for those hours that they're working. Salary is a little different here than hourly. So sometimes we need to just pay somebody their salary. Maybe their salary, let's say, is $2,000 a week, and that's what they're going to get. It doesn't matter if they worked 1 hour, if they worked 100 hours, or anything in between, or over or above those, they're going to get the $2,000. So you don't need to have the hours in there. You can put hours on a timesheet for them, or hours in payroll, but it doesn't change the salary that they're going to get. They're always going to get the $2,000. This can be prorated, of course, if they started or ended in the middle of the period. It might be prorated to be, only a few $100s because they only worked one day or something like that. And then finally, units. So think of this as they're getting paid maybe per mile or per um, units produced. So they might be getting a rate, let's say $5 for every unit they produce, and they produced 100 units, they would get $500. Again, this is something where I could put the rate here, or I could put the rate on the employee, and that's what they're going to get. So you can do that right there. So those are the different calculation methods there. I'm going to reset this back to hourly for my regular time. And what I'm going to do is, rather than going down this column, because these will be talked about in a little bit, I'm going to come back up here at the top. So here you'll see active. So in order to be used, it needs to be active. You can't add a code to somebody that the code's not active. Is this code eligible for overtime? So if we are calculating overtime as part of either our timesheets, are these hours in regular time eligible for overtime? So you may have, let's say, holiday pay or time off that is not eligible for overtime. You would make sure that is unchecked. All right, include in certified rate calculations. So that goes to union payrolls or certified rate payrolls. Do we need to do this? Now, if you don't worry about certified rates, if that's not part of your business, it doesn't matter if this is checked because it's never going to reference a certified rate table. But if you do do a certified payroll, then you want to make sure you're including the right incomes in that. And then makeup time, this is something that I know applies in the state of California, but there are other states where you can make up time off by working extra time some other day. So that's what that is for. Maybe they work 12 hours on Monday so they could take 4 hours off on Friday. That's an example of makeup time. So there's a whole setup on that, and you can reach out to support or implementation there. All right, I've talked about the rate and the multiplier before. Of course, the one thing that's not showing here is these do change based on what I'm doing, so you might see different things in here. All right, but that would be the rate, the default rate for this code. This would be the multiplier for this. And then the certified rate multiplier could be different. We do have some clients where overtime maybe isn't paid at time and a half. If it's a certified rate calculation, it might be paid at double time or some other calculation. That's what this is for. All right, you'll see here it goes away when I don't have that turned on. All right, so exclude from exempt and or exclude from salary here. So what this would be is, let's say somebody is salaried, but when they take time off, we actually want that time off to go against, let's say, vacation. So we would reduce their salary by those vacation hours that they worked. If they worked 8 hours or 32 hours in the week and 8 hours of vacation, their salary would be reduced by 8 times their hourly rate, whatever that happened to be. And in my example of that $2,000, it might be, $400 of vacation and $1,600 of salary. So that's an example of the excluding from. That's what that would be for if you need to do that. System labels. Now, this is one where it can affect many different things. As you saw, there was a formula that can reference system labels. There are tax implications here of it showing in various boxes on the tax forms. It could be something to do with expenses, distances, and things like that. There are many different things where the system labels can apply. You'll see in here, like exclude from a minimum wage, distributions, box 12 for the W-2, T4 boxes down here. This is really, there's so many different ways this can apply in how this is used here. I could probably spend all day just talking about different system labels, but suffice to say that you might see this in here when we are setting up a code for you and we're helping you set these up to be used as part of the calculation of that income, or to show where it's going to be on a tax form. Right? Which payroll number in the month does this apply? So let's say you're a weekly company and a particular income only gets applied the first payroll of the month. So if you come in here, you might see first in here. That means any other payroll in the month, it's not going to calculate that particular income. Second, third, fourth payroll, whatever, it's not going to come out. Maybe there's like an auto allowance, the first payroll of the month, as an example. All right, now if this is blank, it means it doesn't matter which period, just take it out. All right, so that's what blank means. You don't need to come in here and put in like first and second if you're semi-monthly to every code. You can just leave it blank. All right, and then last but certainly not least are the ceilings down here. So these are the limits that might apply to this income for the pay period, for the month, annually, or lifetime. And you can have a combination of these. You might say that annually the max is $1,000, but monthly is $100. So if I tried to do $200 in a month, it wouldn't allow that because they can only do 100. And let's say they're getting paid every month out of the year, November and December wouldn't apply because $1,000 if they're getting $100 a month. So you can have a mixture in here if you need to. All right. I do want to point out up here, you can on a income specify that these are required when that code is used on the timesheet. So if you need to have the project for regular pay, but maybe not other types of income codes, that is something you can set here for that particular income. So this particular setup, project and task would be required anytime I use regular on my timesheet. If I used vacation as an example, it would not be required because unless I went into vacation and turned that on. So that's what you could use this for if you need to set for individual incomes that one or more of these are required. All right, so that's that. I have a couple more minutes here. I want to point out some of these other ones that I have set up just so you can get an idea. I want to point out one that I like to show because it's kind of cool is mileage reimbursement. So this is one where if you're doing expense reimbursements in the system, you can have it show a map and somebody can put in their to and from address and have the system calculate how many miles that is, or kilometers. I called it mileage, but it could be used for distance and you're doing it in kilometers. But you'll see here, there's a couple of system labels I've applied to enable this. So it is part of an expense report. If you want a income to show on the expense report, this system label must be applied. What we're looking at is the code expense. So this is what the crucial part. The actual description of expense, this could say expense report, as long as this part is here expense, the second half in the brackets. Same thing with distance. Distance needs to be there so that when they're doing the expense report, it knows rather than typing in, let's say, an amount that somebody has to calculate, okay, I went this many miles times this rate, and therefore it is this much. The system can help them either type in the amount of miles they drove or kilometers, or use the map to do that. So this is a one in there. And any other expenses, you would need to go through and put that system label on. Here's another example, lodging. I just have expense on there. All right, and this one they would type in an amount. They spent $250 for the hotel. All right, now sometimes you need to put in a units. So mileage does need to be another example of units, but there might be other things where you're doing units in there. Here's let me click on this one here. So this one has a formula, just to give you an example of one type of formula. You can see how this is looking at hours in this particular income code, or sorry, system label, and the rate is, a certain thing. If it's years of service is greater than 1 year, it's 350. If it's less than 1 year, it's 1.12. I don't remember what this is for, but that's an example of a rate. All right, here's a salary one. You can see how this one is configured. It's very much like the regular. All right, and let me just go to an amount, like a bonus. All right, so this one you'll notice here is set as supplemental, which will use the supplemental tax rates and the bonus right there. Now let's talk about assigning this to employees. First off, one way you can assign it to the employees is on the position. So when I go to positions, you may notice that there is a thing on the left-hand side here that says incomes. And I can add one or more codes in here. So what this means is if you hire somebody into the merchandise seller, perhaps there is some, I don't know, I'll just say this grill assembly. All right, so anytime I hire somebody into a merchandise seller, or let's say I transfer, they get a promotion or a job change into merchandise seller, we're going to add this grill assembly to the employee using the effective date of their hire date or the date that they became a merchandise seller. So that's what this is for right here. If you ever needed to assign an income on hire or when somebody becomes that particular job. So you can add any code, anyone when you want. You can have as many as you need. If it's also parking and time off on holiday, I can add 3. Right. And those we get added automatically when I hire a merchandise seller or somebody becomes a merchandise seller. So that's an example of how you can assign that right there. So it's automatic. You don't have to remember whenever you hire somebody to assign that code. But sometimes you do need to assign something just as like a one-off. So I might need to go into, let's say, Charlene here and add an income to her. I can come down to the incomes and I can add right here. All right. And let's do that grill assembly just because I was already looking at it. So here's grill. There's the amount. Now this is an amount one here. So if I check this show in timesheets, it's not going to show because it's not an hourly rate. But if I did have something that was hourly and I wanted to show on the timesheet, I would want to check that box. So here I could put in the effective date. Now this could be any dates. If I do, let's say May 1st, and maybe there's been some payroll since then, we're not going to go back and retroactively do any type of calculation. But maybe it doesn't start until June 1st. That means any payrolls up until June 1st will not have this grill assembly in here. All right. And then you'll see these different ceilings. So perhaps I pay up to $500 for this. That would mean after I've reached, what is it, 13 payrolls, assuming they're getting it every payroll, it's going to turn off. And that last one would only be $20 because of how the math works on that. All right. So that's an example of that. So you cannot have the same code active at the same time. You'll notice here it's not showing because I future dated it. All right, I would not be able to add any of these ones that are active right now to their screen again because it's already here. But I could re-add this cafe residual as long as the effective date is, not within this range. It's kind of weird that it's that way. I'm not sure. I don't remember what I was doing back then, but you can see how this is in here. But I could add cafe residual today and have an amount over there, just like this grill assembly. Once he reaches or she reaches the 500, I can add it again because it's expired. All right, so that's one way to do the incomes on here. I will point out there's also a way to do it through a data import if you need to mass add it to employees. If you come here to data import and payroll, you can mass add it to the employees through here. All right, so I believe it's on the one here. Maybe Connor or Patrick can correct me. I believe it's under payroll employee where I can add these things. Let me just double check this. I don't use these templates all the time, but let me just check here real quick. I'm just waiting for it to open. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's somewhere else. Is it?
You're looking for the
under
1D,
benefits?
Steve? 1D?
Is it 1B? Okay. 1D. There it is.
Yep.
Maybe we need to move that under payroll because it makes sense under payroll instead of 1D. Let me show you this template. I apologize for the confusion. I don't do these all the time. So thank you, Connor, for helping out with there. Now, when I'm adding employee incomes here, the income obviously needs to be set up first. I can't just make up something that doesn't exist. So you have to go through your income setup first, and then you'll be able to add them over here. Let me show you this template. So if you've ever used our templates before, there's a lookup value which shows the existing ones in the system. If I don't see one, let's say I came up with this new thing where I'm going to do, I don't know, a rainbow bonus for whatever reason. Anytime there's a rainbow, we'll give a bonus. I can't just go in here and type in rainbow, for example. I need to set up the code first, and then I can add it to the employees through this import. So what I would do is put in whatever the employee number is. I'm just going to make one up there, 1, 2, 3, 4. Select it from here. Let's just pick on this grill one. What is the effective date? Let's make it 5/1. Oops. 5/1 here, 25. And then I don't need the expiration date. That's not a requirement. I don't need to set show in timesheet. Probably want to put an amount in, but maybe I don't. Maybe I just want to mass add it because I'm going to edit on payroll. But let's say I want to make it $50. I could put a note in there, and then I would just save this and import it in. And of course, I don't need to always do the same code, but let's say I'm adding bonuses to a bunch of people and I want to do, $50 ongoing. And typically this would be used for ongoing things because one thing you don't see here in this is the limit or the ceiling. So I wouldn't use this if this was, let's say, a quarterly bonus because I don't want it to pay out every payroll. That is going to be something you do through the payroll process, but this would be adding it to that income screen I just showed. All right. Let me just talk about that one more time is in payroll, adding it to the payroll process. So I'm just going to go into a payroll here, and you'll see under import, we do have import incomes. Now, this is one where the template is something that support or implementation can help you to set up, because everybody has a different layout for their imports. I've done this before, and it's like no company does it the same way. But you can set up the import to say, okay, column 1 is the employee number, column 2 is the income code, column 3 is the date, column 4 is the amount, or whatever it is. And so that template would be set up, and then you can import that in here. This would be a one-time bonus. So if I am doing that quarterly bonus, this would be like a one-time, we're going to do, a certain amount for each employee. And so that's where you would do that here. Okay. And then of course you can go to an employee in payroll, and I can change things, and here's regular time as an example. And if I want to do that, all right, that's again a one-time override if I change his rate here as an example. All right, so that I believe I've covered everything I can about incomes. I didn't process the payroll, but that's not the scope of this training here. So let's go ahead and look at our upcoming schedule. And I do want to, of course, mention I've talked about implementation of payroll several times during this call here. So I do want to, here it is. I do want to point out, if you have questions, please reach out to us, help@criterionhcm.com. If you're working with a partner, please reach out to your partner. We're here to help you with your questions you might have on incomes and those types of things. As I mentioned, taxability, you need to tell us, but otherwise we can help you out with that. So upcoming in a couple of weeks here, we have employee engagement. So that is a self-service thing. It's going to be the feed on there. It's going to be events, calendars, and stuff like that. It's how you can keep employees engaged using self-service. So we're going to talk about that on June 5th. Then we're going to come back to payroll. We just talked about income, so we're going to do the other side of it, which is deductions. And we'll talk about the configuration and how those are assigned. And then in July, which sounds really strange to me, custom fields and screens. This is something that we've talked about before, but it's been a while, and I want to talk about how those work, and we'll go over that. And there have been some changes since we've originally talked about it. And we have further things planned in July, so I don't want to spoil anybody's, or take away anybody's thunder there. So I'm not going to put it out there, but we do have some really exciting things coming out in July that we'll have some good training on. We'll probably talk about it next time in June. So I do want to say once again, thanks for joining us. Please reach out to us if you have any questions, help@criterionhcm.com. And I hope to see you all again in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much.